Hello, everyone. Amanda Grace here with you today. We have a prophetically packed broadcast for you today. Rabbi Jonathan Cahn is here with us. He's got a new book called The Altar of Pergamum, The Mystery of the Dark Angel and the Future of the World. We're going to be prophetically talking all about this. And so, if you like prophetic deep dives, stay tuned because this is where we are going with this. Welcome to everybody who is watching us in the United States and around the world. We're very happy to have you with us, and we're going to get off and running right away with this. Let's bring in Rabbi Jonathan Cahn.
Hey, Amanda.
Hello. How are
Always
you?
great to good. Always great to be back. I hear people talk about you. Um, you know,
Really?
so it's always a blessing.
Praise God. I'm honored. Praise the Lord for that. So let me we're going to dive into this in just a moment here because this is your new book that's coming out, The Altar of Pergamum. I'm familiar with what this is, but you're gonna show our audience today what this is. So let's start with, for our audience to understand, what does the altar of Pergamum reveal?
Okay. This is probably, I mean, the mystery is so colossal, maybe the most colossal mystery I've been opening. This has been this existing from ancient times, an ancient object. What if it has actually touched the world, has altered the course of history, behind everything from the rise of Adolf Hitler to the
Yes.
First World War to
Mhm.
the Second World War to the rise of Marxism,
Yes.
communism, the Soviet Union. What if it's behind the Cold War, behind the near destruction of the world, behind the New World Order, even linked to the internet and end time prophecy? This is what the altar of Pergamon is going to be revealing, opening up. The subtitle is the mystery of the dark angel and the future of the world, and this mystery has literally impacted every person on earth. Everybody who's watching right now literally impacted it. And what is it? I mean, and it really goes right to the Bible, and yet it's
Yes.
affecting us right now. And I'll just say one other thing about it is Maddie, like the first book I ever wrote was The Harbinger.
Yes.
And I was led to write that in the form of a story, to reach more people. Well, I was led again to write The Altar of Pergamon in the form of a story. And so it's like kind of like a thriller where there's a man and a woman
Yeah.
journeying across the world, and they are he's a skeptic, and they're piecing together this ancient mystic book. And
Mhm.
everywhere they go, there are people who kind of open up the next mystery. There's a person waiting, kind of a mysterious person, and there's an organization linked to the altar trying to stop them. So that is to make this come out, because when I looked at, like we were going over this, there's at least 200 mysteries or revelations that are opened up in the altar pergament. So, but it happens in a story, so you barely even realize it, that it's just happening. And my biggest hope is not only that people who are believers will read it, will get it, but people who are not, and that there are people, it's made so there are people in your life who don't know the Lord, to get it for them, because it'll
Yes.
draw them in without them even knowing. It doesn't matter where they're at, and it actually leads to salvation.
So Pergamum, just for our viewers, is in Turkey. That's where the original altar of Pergamum stood. It was in Turkey. Now, what does that have to do with? Because this ties to Revelation chapter 2, also the throne of Satan.
Yeah. Well, in Revelation it says, I mean, amazing statement, because it actually identifies a
Yes.
place as the throne of Satan on earth. So that's pretty
Yes.
strong right there. And it says where Satan dwells, where the throne of Satan is. And in Isaiah, he quotes Satan as saying, "I will lift up my throne.
Yes, he
I'll be
does.
like,
Isaiah 14, I think it is. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll be like the Most High." And
Yes.
so so the thing is that, so it's identifying that. Now, if you've ever gone to Pergamon, and I just went there for the first time, there's a high place, and they have all these ancient pagan things. But the key thing on that mountain of Pergamon was called the Great Altar, or the
Yes.
Altar of Pergamon, linked to the god of the gods, linked to Zeus, but we know of Satan. And this
Yes.
became like the embodiment of the throne of Satan, of that place. And the amazing thing is that when the gospel came from Israel to the world, actually the people started abandoning the gods and the temples, and they abandoned the altar of Pergamon, and so it fell into the ruins, and it was covered, it was laid covered for ages. So think about that. The gospel comes forth, the
Yeah.
throne of Satan is buried in the ruins.
Yes.
And so it's like the power of Satan is being restrained. There's always evil in the world, but when the gospel it restrains evil. But
Yes.
what would happen if that altar, if that throne of Satan was ever uncovered, excavated? And what would happen? The thing is, it happened. And once it was taken out of the ground, somebody made the mistake, I would say, of uncovering it, and the world started changing.
Yes, it did start changing. So what was the sign that appeared along with the altar that kind of foreshadowed things to come?
Yeah, well, a few things. One is that the man comes from far away to Pergamon,
Yes.
and he kind of doesn't even know what he stumbled on. And he starts uncovering. He takes the first two pieces and he sends it back to his homeland. And his homeland is now going to be joined to the throne of Satan. And so, what was his homeland? His
Germany.
homeland is Germany,
Hmm.
and
Yes.
Germany is now going to become the center of this. Going to become the possessor of the throne of
Yes.
Satan. And so, look at. I mean, just by that. Look, in fact, Germany did not even exist. Did not even exist before until this happened. In the same year that the throne of Satan returns to the world, Germany
Yes.
comes to the world. And so that happens. But at the same moment, there's another man from Germany, and he goes to the same land, and he uncovers something else. He uncovers this ancient sign which enters into the world, and the sign is the swastika. I only started doing interviews, and it's like the enemy's trying to stop me from getting this out. So let me just
Well,
fix
we
it.
just pray for
That
your throat in
happens
the name of
nowhere.
Jesus Christ that it clears.
Never happened.
Your throat clears in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach.
Amen. So
Amen.
so the same year that the altar comes into the world, Germany comes into the world, and the swastika comes into the world. And the thing is that now the guy who uncovered the altar gets Germany to unearth the entire thing.
Yes.
And so they
Uh-huh.
start unearthing it in 1878. And they start and as they do, and they start transferring it. They put it on animals, on boats, on ships, on trains, and it goes to Berlin. It's kind of like you imagine Indiana Jones, except it's real. This is real.
Yes.
The thing
Yes.
is that as the first pieces now come to Germany in the transference, something happens to Germany. Something comes into the world that wasn't there before. There's always been hatred of the Jews, but a new ideology comes into the world, which we call anti-Semitism. As soon as the altar comes to Germany, it's born in Germany. The word anti-Semitism didn't exist. It comes into the
Yeah.
world just as the altar comes to Germany. So all this is like it's like this. It's like the enemy is setting in motion what his plans are, and anti-Semitism starts spreading throughout Germany. And you know what else does when the altar comes to Germany? There's an occult explosion that comes throughout Germany.
Yes.
Witchcraft,
Uh-huh.
the same moment, and it's all going to converge in what's going to happen. Which we have an idea of that, but it's all linked to this throne of Satan.
Now, let me ask you too, right before all of this, when does the Weimar Republic come into play? Is this like part of the timeline a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, right?
Yeah, the
Okay.
Weimar Republic comes into the world right after World War One. And by the way, we
Okay.
probably won't have time to go into it, but the
Yeah.
altar, this throne of Satan, that when it is linked, is behind World War One. Because the enemy's the destroyer,
Yes. Yes.
is behind World War Two. Everything. And so
Yes.
yeah, and so actually, one of the things that happens is that at the end of World War One, just when the Weimar Republic starts, something else happens. A man from Germany goes to Turkey, the land of the altar, and
Yes.
he gets into all this occult knowledge in Turkey. and he brings it to Germany, just like the throne of Satan was brought to Germany from Turkey. He brings this occult knowledge to Germany, and he starts an organization. And the organization he starts is called the Thule Society. The
Yes.
Thule Society that decides to start a little party that becomes the Nazi Party. So the Nazi Party was born of an occult organization that was linked to the land of the throne of Satan. And of course, Hitler's going to come into that party, and the rest is going to be history. But it keeps going because as what Germany does is they start lifting up the altar. They build it a giant house. They call it the Pergamon Museum. It's all built for that. And as they're building this house for the altar, it's rising. Hitler is rising, and the Nazis are rising,
Yes.
and they're rising at the same time. And Hitler, by the way, I didn't even say this. At one point, like when they got the pieces back to Berlin, they decide to put it together. There's like thousands of pieces. For the first time since ancient times, they put the altar of Pergamon together, the throne of Satan, in Berlin. At the moment they put it back together. So the altar is appearing in the world, throne of Satan, for the first time. At the same moment, something else appears in the world. A baby is born, and his name is Adolf Hitler.
Yes.
He comes into the world as the altar comes into the world. So at the same moment. And so his whole life is going to be linked to the mystery of this altar. I mean, his whole life. And so, and we won't be able to go into the detail, but every part of his life he's going to rise with the altar. And in 1930, Germany opens up this new house of the altar, reveals the rebuilt altar to the world. At that same moment, Amanda, the Nazi Party in 1928, the last election before that, what happened was it got 2% of the vote. 2%. It was on its way out. But all of a sudden, when the altar comes back, the Nazi Party is suddenly catapulted, becomes the second largest party in Germany overnight. And and then within a short time, the number one party, and then Hitler takes over. Do you know when the altar was revealed to the world in 1930?
When?
On Yom Kippur.
Oh, the Day of Atonement.
The holiest. And what does the enemy do? The enemy takes the things of God.
Yes.
He twists them. So, and Yom Kippur is about the Jewish people getting saved. And so now the altar comes into the world, and it's not to save them, it's to destroy them. So with that, then Hitler comes to power. And when he comes to power, Amanda, when you see Hitler standing in front of these multitudes of Germans, it's at Nuremberg. Nuremberg is where, he had the rallies and all that, and he decides he wants a giant, colossal platform to stand on to rail to the world. Well, he commissions his architect, a guy named Albert Speer. Albert Speer builds him a massive, colossal throne. Thing to stand on. So when you see him, but Speer based that altar, that thing on. It was a replica of the altar of Pergamon. It was so when you see Hitler railing, he's standing on the throne of Satan, and he's railing to the world on the throne of Satan. You cannot put this together. You could not. It's so that's what this is how real the enemy is. And so literally he invokes the destruction of that world on the throne of Satan. And there's something else too, because the altar was a special kind of altar. It was the altar of Pergamon, throne of Satan, was an altar of burnt offerings.
Yes.
And now the ones who built the altar are the Greeks. And in the language of the Greeks, the way you say burnt offering is the word for burnt is the word kaustos, and the word for a holy consumed offering is the word halos. Put it together, you get the word Holocaust.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So the altar was the altar of Holocaust. So the moment it arrived in Germany, the Holocaust was coming. This was Satan's plan. And in fact, the earliest translation of the Bible, the Septuagint, the New Testament uses it. It was into Greek. And when it gets to, and it actually use it in the Bible, uses the word Holocaust. When God says to Abraham, offer up your son as a it says in the first, it says as a Holocaust. And in Leviticus, it says, these are the laws of the Holocaust. You'll be continual fire burning. Well, that's what the Holocaust was, a satanic inversion of God's
Yes.
sacrifice. That's what it was,
Yeah, yes, that's what it was. It was reverse engineered by
Yeah,
Satan in the kingdom of
yeah,
darkness. That's exactly what he did. He
yeah,
reverse
yeah.
engineered it.
And these were this sacrifice
Yeah.
has saved Israel. Now he's using it to destroy Israel. And Amanda, like when it says in the Bible, there's a place where it says that the altar of burnt offering was in the holy place. And it's a scripture, the altar of burnt offering. But when you translate that into the language of those who possess the altar of Pergamon, or the throne of Satan, in Greek, again, burnt offering becomes Holocaust. It's a word in German that means the holy place. So the altar, the Holocaust in the
Yes.
holy place, the word is Auschwitz. Auschwitz means
Okay, Auschwitz.
holy
Yes.
place.
Okay.
So
Now,
I mean, you can't make it up.
no, you can't. Now, let me ask you a question. Something very interesting with
Yes.
this. Wasn't Hitler born during Passover that year that he was born, or he rose to power? There's something to him in Passover, too,
Yes.
around the time he was born,
Okay.
which
Yeah.
probably prophetically ties to this.
Totally, and yeah, and it goes along with everything we're saying.
Yeah.
Hitler was, he wasn't born on the first day of Passover, but he was born during the feast of
Yeah.
Passover.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
And yes, and putting it all together. I wasn't going to share this, but the day that the Holocaust began, it began on the day of Passover. So think about like the first offering. What's the first offering that the Jewish people offered up as a nation? It was Passover, the lamb.
It was.
So what does the enemy do? He takes that and he offers up the first offering, which is a Jewish person. By the way, the first sacrifice of the Holocaust was on the day of Passover, was a Jewish man who was a descendant of Aaron, the priest, who offers up sacrifices. And so Hitler, and this brings us to, I'm glad you brought up Hitler. Hitler was really the priest of the satanic offering, the Holocaust.
Yes.
And
Yes.
at the end, what does he do? He's got to offer up his own life.
Yes.
The enemy's through with him and he destroys him. And Hitler, the same hand that offers himself up. And what does Hitler say about his body? It has to be burned. It becomes a burnt offering, a Holocaust.
Yes.
I mean, and it's not that Hitler knew anything, and not
Yeah.
that the
No,
devil.
it's the powers and principalities and rulers of darkness
Yeah,
did, and he was their prop.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
there's so much. I'm just giving a taste, but there's more. Like that's just one thing. Now there's a whole nother evil that we're dealing with today. Like we're
Yes.
dealing with anti-Semitism. We know that's rising. It never dies. But we're also dealing with another thing, which is the rise of socialism, which we're watching
Yes.
in America.
Yes.
Well, this is also linked to the throne of Satan and the altar, because where does it all begin? Begins with the guy Karl Marx is born.
Yes.
Where's he born? Germany. People think they'll think of communism, they'll think of it comes from Russia. No, it comes from Germany. Communism comes from Germany. Marxism comes from Germany. All comes from Germany with the altar. Well, Marx is raised knowing about Jesus at the beginning. And he actually, when he's 17 years old, he writes, I put it in the book, he writes this like a devotion to Jesus, saying we all have to give our lives to Jesus. I mean, give our devotion to Jesus. I mean, Marx. But when he's 18, they send him to Berlin, which is the place where the throne of Satan's going to be.
Mhm.
Something happens to him. He gets transformed.
Yes.
And he starts writing words that strange verses that it's like Satan is speaking directly through him. He says, for instance, you know how Satan says in Isaiah 14, I will exalt my throne?
Yes.
Mark
Yes.
says, I will lift up my throne high above all things. He says, I'm going to bring the world to destruction, and I'm going to walk among the ruins like a god. And he says, I have this sword. He says, this is Marx, the prince of darkness gave it to me. I mean, and you know what Marx's his favorite quote was? His favorite quote was from Faust. He's quoting a demon saying that everything that exists deserves to perish or be destroyed. That was Karl Marx. So Karl Marx, I mean, at the bottom of Marxism is satanic. And the thing is, but here's what happens. Marx then writes the manifesto. Nobody reads
Uh-huh.
it, pretty much. And years later they forgot him. No, he's forgotten. He's a forgotten. We would never have heard of Karl Marx. He's living in exile. He's
Yes.
not talking to anybody. He doesn't go. Nothing's happening. He's gone. But then something happens. The throne of Satan goes to Germany. And at
Yes.
the moment it goes to Germany, all of a sudden Marxism is resurrected in that same year. And Karl Marx suddenly becomes lifted up. And he reissues the manifesto. Now, at first time, it's called the Communist Manifesto in the year of the altar. And all of a sudden, it revives this evil, revives to the world from Germany,
Yes.
in German, and it goes to Russia. Now,
Yes.
now in Russia, there's a child who is born. Like, remember I was telling you, like, when they started uncovering the altar,
Yes.
they put their shovels in there, and the very moment that they begin uncovering the altar, the child is born. And who's the child? The child's name is Joseph Stalin. So
Interesting.
you got the two monsters of the 20th
Yes.
century, each of
Born.
them come into the world connected to the throne of Satan. So this is going. I mean, and by the way, like when you read about, like, the Soviet, the revolution, Soviet Union, it didn't the way. Here's the real story. It didn't happen the way we hear it. They hear, okay, they say, like, Lenin goes to Russia, and he starts his revolution. Well, they already overthrew the czar before the communists came in. The communists never overthrew the czar. They overthrew democracy, because
Yeah.
Russia was going to be a democracy. And
Yes.
so what happens is Germany, not Russia, Germany, Berlin, from the city of the throne of Satan, they have a plan. They take Lenin from Europe, they put him on a train that goes through Berlin, and they send him into Russia. So it
Okay.
begins with the throne of Satan, Berlin. They send him in, and what happens from that? The Soviet Union happens from it. So
Yes.
even the Soviet Union, communism, Nazism, all comes from the throne of Satan.
Interesting. Yeah, and you know what's fascinating is that that altar originally was erected in Turkey.
Yes.
Turkey happens to become the ringleader in the War of Ezekiel,
Yeah.
in Ezekiel chapter 38, which I find that fascinating because that's another, foreshadowing in a way of everything we're seeing of when Ezekiel 38 finally comes, because that's where that altar is.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing that, yeah, the original thing was the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire was basically evil,
Yeah.
and I mean, they committed all sorts of crimes, and it was the link between Turkey and Germany that brought, not only brought Nazism, it brought World War One. Was linked to Turkey and Germany, and brought the Nazi Party, as I said, and it's ultimately continually evil, as you said. So yeah, it's all, yeah. And in fact, you can trace world history by just following the altar.
You
Wherever
can,
the altar
honestly.
is, you're going to see. In fact, that leads to this, because I said that Hitler kills himself, and he kills himself underground in that bunker, in Berlin. But the thing is, there's another bunker in Berlin that's holding something else. So you got Hitler in one bunker.
Okay.
In the other bunker, the Nazis have hidden the throne of Satan in Berlin. So now you got, Hitler was the master, was the owner of that altar. It was Germany, and it was under Hitler. Hitler owned the throne of Satan. He was the master. And so what happens after Hitler dies, and the altar is going to pass into another hand? And in fact, and it doesn't even go one day. Then it's almost like the altar. It's almost like it's called that the next day after Hitler dies, and they didn't find Hitler yet, so it's not that the world knew it.
Yeah, yeah.
The soldiers end up, they stumble upon this bunker, they open it up, and it's the throne of Satan, and they take possession of it. And who was it? It was the Red Army, the altar of Pergamon, the
Yeah.
throne of Satan, now is possessed by the Soviet Union and by Joseph Stalin, the child who was born when the altar came into the world. Now he is the master of the altar. And what happens? The Soviet Union first they put it on, they put the altar on a trains, let's just like, and they transport it to Russia. And what happens to the Soviet Union at that moment? It goes from a power to a superpower. And what happens? It starts spreading. All of a sudden, it's like socialism, Marxism is anointed, a dark anointing. It starts spreading over Eastern Europe, takes over Eastern Europe, takes over China, until 1/3 of the entire world is under this dark satanic thing. And when it reaches its height, it's only when they possessed the throne of Satan. So when we talk about the Soviet Union, talk about socialism, it is linked to the throne of Satan, and they actually possessed it. That's how real this is. You can
Okay.
understand like everything from this one object.
So now, two things, because this just dropped in my spirit while you're talking. You say a third of the world comes under this dark power,
Yes.
right? And it was a third of the angels that fell in the initial rebellion. So we're watching that repeat itself basically, but now in the earth. So we're watching the repeat of that rebellion
Yeah.
in heaven now manifest itself on earth through this.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, and what you're linking this, which is right, to it's Satan who
Yes.
goes with the third of the angels. And what are we talking about? We're talking about the throne of Satan, and we're talking about a third of the world. You know, and
Yeah.
I mean, in one sense, a third of the world becomes communist, and it even goes further because it literally it's dividing the world. So now you have the throne of Satan, which was possessed by Nazi Germany, is now
Yes.
now the new capital of evil in the world is the Soviet Union. I mean, and think about it. Every power that gets the throne of Satan, what happens to them? They turn on the Jewish people.
Yes.
They hate the Jewish people. They hate Christians. They war against the church. They war against Israel. And so that's what happens. So now the Soviet Union becomes that, but it goes even further
Yes.
because, and this is when I say it's affected everybody, doesn't matter who you are. Um, hang on one second. You keep going, the enemy's trying to stop. It's a good sign, everybody.
That's because we can prophetically take off like a rocket together on these topics. That's why.
Yeah.
We could just prophetically just go.
Well, oh yeah, and that's what I love doing interviews because it's never just an interview. It's like an explosion both ways.
It's like a prophetic
Yeah.
explosion. Now, something interesting I want to get your take on before we continue. Back in 2017, now I discovered this recently. The Lord had me stumble upon this. In 2017, at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, the year President Trump takes office, they decided to bring an exhibit in called The Glory of Pergamum. In New York City, they take pieces of Pergamum and they bring it to New York City in 2017. And they decide to have an exhibit called The Glory of Pergamum, which happens almost 10 years before we see the rise of what we've now seen in New York City. And he was anointed underground. So Hitler kills himself underground. And
Yeah.
now we've got a New York City mayor, Zoran Mamdani, who has the name Haman hidden in his name, by the way. You can spell Haman from his name. Now anointed underground.
Mm.
After that glory of Pergamum came.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't believe there's any accidents here.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it's interesting because there's another side. I don't, interesting because in Berlin, and I'm jumping ahead here now, but in
That's okay.
Berlin, they closed down the altar for a number of years, and they're reopening it this coming year to the world. When they
Is it
reopened it in
2027 or 2026? They're reopening.
2027. Yeah, 20. Yeah, I mean, this year is coming to its close. They're going to open it in this coming year. Yes, and it's been closed for years. And the
And
thing
it's a
is
Jewish leap year next year where there's double Purums.
that
And that's when they're opening it.
double pour. Think about
Think
yeah.
about this. We could go down a whole rabbit hole here with that.
These are good rabbit holes, though.
Yeah,
And the thing is that yeah, when it was opened, well, there's so much. When it was opened in
okay.
1930, this was the rise of Hitler. It was opened again. We're going to get to it. What happened after that. So yeah. So now the word. One of the things I want to open the word devil.
Okay.
And I know but people use the word devil. They don't know where it's from. Devil
Yes.
comes from diabolus, and
Yes.
diabolus means literally the divider, the one who casts through, the divider. So Satan is a divider, because if he can divide, he tries to divide man against God, man against woman, divide everything. If you can divide, you can conquer and destroy, and a house divided can't stand. So what's going to happen now is he's going to, through linked to this, he's going to seek to divide the world. So what happens? At the world gets, as soon as the altar gets, you had Germany had it. Now when Russia has it, the world is going to be divided in two. It's going to be the Cold War. And behind the Cold War is the altar. Where did it all begin? In Berlin with the altar.
Altars need bloodshed to be powered. People have to understand this. And you have to power an altar, you need a lot of bloodshed.
That's exact. Yes.
Yes.
And
Okay.
and I well, yeah, I put it in the book. It says the altar requires blood. And the thing is that, so that's why the altar required, you had World War One, which we can't even get into, was behind it was the altar, blood. World War Two, behind it was the Holocaust, blood. The altar requires it, and it's gonna, and so now you've got the potential to destroy the entire world. We talk about Satan and the world says, oh, that's just no, this is so real. If these things happen, we wouldn't exist today. That's how real this is. So Satan tried to destroy the world. And so the thing is that, so divide the world, and also what did the world, it starts in Berlin. What did the world have? The world, the powers had now the power to destroy the entire world. But that's also linked to the altar, because the thing is, if I said, where did the atomic age begin? Most people would say, well, America, New Mexico, but no. The atomic age began, the power of nuclear destruction began with the altar of Satan. It began in Berlin, and it began under Adolf Hitler. It was in 1938 that two of his scientists split the atom, and that began the entire thing. So now think about that, because you said the altar requires blood. Well, think about this too. And the altar is what kind of altar? It's the altar. The throne of Satan is the altar of burnt offerings, destruction. So, and how do you say that in Greek? Holocaust. Well, how do we use the word Holocaust today? Only two ways. One, to speak of Hitler, and the other when we say nuclear holocaust, right? And so the altar is an altar, and what is, that the burnt offering, it means wholly consumed. Well, what power comes into the world? There's one that can wholly consume everything. It's that, and it's linked to the altar. And now you got the world divided. You got and by the way, I probably only because I'm on with you, because I do things when I'm with you that are not. I don't do it other things. And so I'll say this. I'll just mention it because there's so much. But there's a mystery that kept Hitler. Hitler wanted the bomb, wanted the atom bomb, couldn't get it. But the mystery went back to Leviticus that kept him from getting it. Instead, America got it, and it has to do with the Jewish people. You know that behind all that, Albert Einstein, atomic bomb, Oppenheimer, almost all of them were Jewish, and because the Jewish people were in charge of kindling the fire of God. And the word, actually what we translate as Holocaust, there's a whole mystery. We can't get into it, but okay. So the enemy, you have two sides now. Now here's what happens. In the Soviet Union, for some reason, political, decides to bring the altar back to Berlin. And they do this in the year 1958. And remember, they're not giving up possession because Berlin is under the Soviet Union. The soldiers are all in Berlin. And so they still have the altar. They're the owners of the altar, but the location changes. So does anything happen? As soon as they bring it back to Berlin, the whole world almost explodes over Berlin. Berlin becomes the center of the Cold War. And in 1958, you have Khrushchev of the Soviet Union demands that the West get out of Berlin. The West says no, and you almost have the beginning of a nuclear war. Okay. But when did that begin? The Berlin crisis began in November 1958. When did the altar go to Berlin? November 1958. So it's all following the altar.
It's all connected, yes.
And it doesn't end because a few years later, it erupts again with John Kennedy. And so you got Khrushchev and Kennedy. And Khrushchev again is obsessed with Berlin. And so what happens is he puts up the Berlin Wall.
Yes.
And what happens is you get a showdown. Something happens at what's called Checkpoint Charlie. at the wall, and you have the Soviet troops on one side, armed and ready to fire. You have American troops on the other side of the wall, and you have the altar of Pergamon, the throne of Satan, right there, right within like a mile of it. And the world, it was the closest the world ever came to. It almost led to nuclear destruction at all over the plate, the throne of Satan. Okay, but it goes even farther, because the next year was the most dangerous moment in world history. If one thing had gone wrong, we wouldn't exist today, and that was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Crisis,
And
yes.
and the thing is, here's the thing: the story we hear is that the Soviet Union put missiles in Cuba, and America discovered it, which is true. Kennedy quarantines the island with American ships. Soviet Union ships are coming with more missiles. The world is ready for destruction. People are preparing bomb shelters. They're putting dog collars on their children to identify them. I mean, literally the entire world is ready for destruction. One little wrong move, the whole world would be destroyed. That's what the enemy wants. But here's the mystery they don't tell you. Behind it all was something else, because it didn't begin in Cuba. You know where it began? First of all, it began in Berlin with that showdown, and so
Yes.
that I just mentioned, and that so both sides were putting missiles around the world. But what happened was Khrushchev of the Soviet Union is near the Black Sea, and they point out to him that just beyond the Black Sea are missiles that America put that to go into Soviet Union. He says, "Okay, they did that. We're going to put missiles at their doorstep at Cuba." It was because so it wasn't the missiles in Cuba, it was these other missiles by the Black Sea. So where were they? The missiles that almost brought the world to the end. You know where they were, Amanda? They were in the land of Pergamon.
They were in Turkey.
They were not only in Turkey, they were Turkey has a lot of states. It was in the state of Izmir. It was in the very region of, it was in the, not only, the missiles were in the ancient kingdom of Pergamon. So the entire world almost was brought to destruction from Pergamon. And not only that, remember, like the altar, what was the altar? Was the altar to Zeus, king of the gods. Well, and so Turkey, the altar of Pergamon, was linked to Zeus. Well, in Rome, Zeus is called Jupiter. That's it. The missiles that almost destroyed the world in Pergamon bore the name Jupiter, the god Jupiter.
Interesting.
It almost destroyed the entire world.
That's fascinating.
And now,
that is.
And it doesn't. It's going to take us up to right where we are, man.
Okay.
A few things. One is that is if we get to it, because when I got to say, when you're watching this, when there's always these explosions, and I don't always know where that's going to go. But we are going now. Okay, if you take it to where we are, okay. Here's the next thing that happens. In 1989, the wall comes down.
Yes, the Berlin Wall.
So what that means is that it changes the ownership of the altar. Remember, the altar's there. The throne of Satan's right there. So what happens? First thing that happens is Germany becomes united. And so all of a sudden, the Soviet Union does not have the altar anymore. Communism doesn't have the altar anymore. And so what happens? All of a sudden, the Soviet Union vanishes overnight. The communist world collapses without the altar of Satan, without the throne, like that. You could, and so, and by the way, I didn't tell you, I didn't mention this. When the soldiers of the Red Army, they took the altar, it was May Day. That was the day they discovered the altar in Berlin. May Day is the chief holiday of the Soviet Union. When they have the May Day parades, they were celebrating May Day. Communism was celebrating May Day years before, but it was a prophecy. That was the day they would come into the altar of Satan. And May Day is one of the high holy days on the satanic calendar. And this was communism. So, but now they lose it, and all of a sudden communism collapses. And what's going to rise up? Well, who has the altar now? Well, you can say Germany, but Germany is under something else. Germany is under the European Union.
The European Union has the altar now.
Yes. And so now think about that.
The woman riding the beast.
Yeah.
But that's what's on her. That's what's on their coin, actually. That image is on their coin. Yes. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Right. And the thing is, so now what is the next power? What is now rising? And the thing is this, the enemy tried to destroy the world by dividing it. Now he's going to try to possess the world by joining it together as one world. So all of a sudden, with the altar coming, with the wall coming down, all of a sudden they change the altar. There's all this talk about the New World Order. That starts
Yeah.
when the Berlin Wall comes down. And by the way, the European Union was founded right after the wall came down, right after the possession came to Europe. That's when it happened. And the thing is, so now we're talking about a one world order. And think about this. What was the last power that possessed the altar of Pergamon in ancient times when it was still functioning? It was Rome. Rome.
Yeah.
And then when the altar disappears, Rome disappears. And
Yes.
what happens? Now, when the altar comes back, what's coming back? It's a Roman, a revived, resurrected, one world order Roman thing. And what entity in the world has more of the Roman Empire than any other? The European Union.
Yeah.
And the
They
European
do.
has the altar. But let me throw in something else. It's not only that's bringing the world. What else is bringing the world together? The web is bringing the world together. The internet is bringing the world together. Well, do you know, Amanda, the internet, when the wall came down, it was 1989. 1989 is when the internet was conceived. When it came into the world when this came, same moment. And you may have, I mean, most people don't know this. You may, in Hebrew, in every computer we have www World
Yes.
Wide Web.
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
what is that in Hebrew? That's vav, vav,
Of,
vav,
of.
which is the number 6.
Yes.
Every computer has 666 on it. So it comes into the world with a throne of Satan. It is 666 on every computer.
That's what Apple sold their first computer for, $666. There you go.
Amazing.
There you go. And
And,
it's the
and,
piece of fruit bitten out of.
yeah, and that's
Okay.
right. And it's on every computer. And so all this is part of the bringing that together. And you mentioned something that is about this woman. So there's a false god who wants to seduce this princess. So he turns himself into a bull, and he goes to her. She says, "Oh, what a nice
Europa.
bull!
Her
What a
name
nice
is
bull! Yeah,
Europa.
what a
Yes.
nice
Okay.
bull!" When you get on
Yes.
there, bull, abducts her now. And well, who is the princess? Her name is Europa. So
Yes.
we get the word. So the word Europe comes from an ancient myth. But now think about that. Who was the god? It was
I know
Zeus.
this. Yep.
It was Zeus. So think now you've got and Zeus is just a
I
mask of
just
Satan.
taught on this from the book
Yeah,
of Revelation. What you're
yeah.
saying here, I
It's
just taught
this
on
thing.
this.
Zeus is a mask of Satan, and
Yeah.
so think about it. You have the altar of Zeus is now possessed by the land called Europa. And what is that about Europa? Is she gets carried away, taken away by a false god. And so when the altar of Pergamon or the throne of Satan comes to Europe, she gets taken away by Nazism, taken away by communism, and ultimately will be taken away by Satan,
And
by
this
the
is
Antichrist.
why we have an invasion in Europe happening right now of the Ishmaelites coming in, trying to invade Europe. This,
And Europe is and we know Amanda, prophetically, Europe has a strong place, and the Antichrist is going to be linked to that. So that means the
yes,
Antichrist is going to possess the throne of Satan. And by the way,
yes.
there's a whole other thing we won't have time to go into, but to
Okay.
say that, but in the book is that when you look at the return of of Satan's throne of
Yes.
the world, it's linked to something else. You know what it's linked to?
What?
Because what does he war against? The Satan's kingdom wars against God's kingdom. What is
Yes.
God's kingdom linked to? Israel. Israel.
Yes.
Because the enemy knows if Israel comes back, the king is coming back.
That's
So
the prophetic time clock.
yeah,
Yeah, Israel is our prophetic time clock.
and he's trying everything he can to stop that nation. Well,
Yes.
you know what happened. The other key here is that it's when God starts bringing Israel back into the world that Satan brings the throne of Satan back into the world. And so everything matches at
Yeah.
the moment that God started, like the 1870s, that's when the throne comes
Yes.
back. And so what is it linked to? Germany that almost tries to destroy Israel and the Soviet Union. So you got this war going. It's all linked to it because what does he want to do? He wants to put his throne on the throne of God. And on earth, what is the place? That it's like on earth, it's the Temple Mount. That's where God was enthroned. And if you go on the Temple Mount, you may know this because
I've been
you
there.
go to the Temple Mount, you
Uh-huh.
look at the plate, you look at that dome of the rock that's over the throne of God, and you see in the stone, you'll see the image of Satan on that rock. It's literally in that rock. You'll see the face of Satan standing on the throne of God. So we are. Let me just. There's so much, Amanda, and with you, it's even more than so much. Let me just say,
Okay.
I just gave a taste. There's probably like 200 revelations about it. But the thing is that what it's saying is that, listen, that Satan is real. That means God is even more real. And what we're dealing with in the world, we are in a real fight. This has affected our lives, every one of us. It is even the key to the future. And the thing is that, every power that had the throne of Satan turned against the Jews,
Yeah.
Israel, and Christians. But in the end, they're gone.
They
But
fall.
we're here, and
Yes,
we're
amen.
here because
Praise
God
God.
wins. And that means,
Amen.
if that's real, listen, God is real, and we have a better altar. We've got the altar of,
Amen.
and that overpowers everything. So my main thing is that it's really a colossal mystery, and the thing is that it's real, and this is telling how real the Bible is, and the Word is real. But it's also saying this. I'm also praying. I'm hoping, and I don't know if I said at the beginning, but one of the reasons why I was led. I mean, again, I didn't even know. We're going to see what happens when they open up that altar again in Berlin. But this coming year. But the reason why I was led also is that not only for believers to get stronger, but I'm praying that people will get the Altar of Pergamon to their unsaved friends, because it's going to draw people in. It has, it's a story. But it leads to salvation, and you can even be someone who's against God and say, "Oh, it's a story about this. Let me get," and they'll get saved.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm praying, is that people get it, not just themselves, that they get it for people in their lives who need salvation.
So
And
where can they get the book? Where can they pre-order the book?
it's going to be everywhere, everywhere. It's coming out like right around now. But if
Okay.
you go on Amazon, you'll see it right now. If Ultra Pergamon, if you go anywhere where you get books, you'll see it, and it's soon going to be in every bookstore that you know of. It'll be there by God's grace. But just remember, it's the Ultra Pergamon, the byline. So in case there's another book called that, it's the Mystery of the Dark Angel and the Future of the World. But
Yes.
again, I just encourage people to pray. I mean, pray for God to use it for this,
Yeah.
in a powerful way, but that people give it to people who don't know the Lord as
Yes.
well. Because it's amazing. I mean, God's amazing.
God is amazing. And this has been an amazing time. So, yes, you can go to Amazon, search the Altar of Pergamum, the mystery of the Dark Angel and the future of the world, and you can buy it there. Rabbi Jonathan Cahn, thank you so much for joining us.
Amanda, it's always a joy, and more than a joy. God
Thank you. It's a wonderful time. That's when we two of us get together. Praise
bless.
God. Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem.
God bless you.
Hey, God bless you, Amanda.